It's a really cool day outside, so I decided that I'm going to make some butternut squash soup, but I want to make some jalapeno bread to go with it. It's my famous cheesy jalapeno bread. Come along with me. Okay, so before we get started making the bread, I've got to get my butternut squash for my next video. I'm going to show you how I make my butternut squash soup. I'm going to roast it in the oven first with some garlic in it. I'll show you how. Okay, I've got my fancy fall apron from Pauletta over at Favorite Things on Facebook. That's where I got this. If you guys want to get one, go over there and look. She has new ones all the time and they are cute. My daughter actually got me to see where she is making mommy and me aprons. Those are adorable. Okay, so the shell of the butternut is pretty tough, so you want a pretty good knife. I'm using this one. It's my rotted knife. You know I love those. And I buy my rotted knives from the Mennonites. Well, actually, I have a bunch of them that were a gift from a friend. Thanks again, Eileen. Thanks again. I've had them for years, but I always go by the Mennonite store because they have them there, and I add to my collection that way. So I cut that on both sides, pull it apart because that stem doesn't want to, it's really hard. Okay, now to scoop out the seeds. I've had this jagged edge spoon. You can see it's jagged. I don't know if it's a grapefruit spoon or what, but I've had that for years, and it's what I use to do this little job here because it scrapes so well at the tip of that where those little spikes are. I think I'm going to save these butternut seeds. I don't know if they will be viable or not, but it's worth trying to save the seeds for, especially this year when we're expecting to have some seed shortages because so many people are going to gardening. As I scrape those out, I'm going to put them into a colander because I'm going to rinse all the pulp that's left on there off, and then I'll put it on a paper towel and let it dry for a little bit, and then I'll put it in a paper sack. I am saving a lot of seeds, and I do have a video coming up showing you how I'm doing that. I've still got some things in the garden that need to dry out enough that I can save my seeds. So I'm just going to do that with both halves. Okay, so most people eat butternut squash soup as a cold, sweet, almost like a dessert type soup. My soup is served hot, and it's going to be more of a savory type of soup. So I'm going to crush up these garlic cloves. You really don't have to peel the skins off of them, but I'm going to. I'm going to put them right there in the center because the garlic is actually going to roast inside there, and then the juice will cook into that and make a really savory broth. Okay, so I just put those cloves of garlic inside there, and after I put them in the oven, they're going to roast, and it's going to roast that garlic along with the tops of this butternut, and that will actually fill up. I'm going to put just a tiny, like a half a teaspoon of butter inside there. So what I have in each one of these is a half a teaspoon of butter. What's going to happen is as that cooks, the juices and the butter will all meld together, and it'll make a really savory roasted garlic flavor. Put these on a cookie sheet and brush them with olive oil. I'm going to put these out there in the oven just like that. I'm not going to cover them or anything. Put them out in the oven, in my outdoor oven, and put it on 400 and roast them for about 45 minutes. And tomorrow I will put out the video on how I finish up making this soup for you guys. But today we're going to work on the jalapeno cheesy garlic bread. Okay, so in the camper here, I don't keep my yeast in the freezer. At the farmhouse I do, and I have bulk yeast that I have stored up there. But because of space and things here at the camper, I just buy packages of yeast And this one got buried in the back of my cabinet, and it has a best of use date at September of 2019. So I need to make sure before I go to all the trouble that my yeast is actually still alive. The recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. So I'm measuring that out. And then I need 2 tablespoons of sugar. Okay, and it also calls for 2 tablespoons of dry milk. I'm going to use buttermilk. I don't use a lot of the powdered buttermilk, so it hardens over time just from being damp and then not damp and then damp in this camper. Probably the next time I do this, I will transfer my buttermilk to a glass jar and then use my brake bleeder vacuum seal on it. Okay, so 2 tablespoons. One of the very most important things when you're making bread is to make sure that you get your water temperature in your yeast the right temperature. You want it to be warm so that the yeast activates, but you don't want it to be hot to where it kills the yeast. And so I have my little gadget here. It's still at 109, which is still just a tad bit too warm for my yeast, so I'm going to give it a few more minutes and then I'll pour it in there. I like it to be at 100 degrees because when you pour it into this pan with the sugar, it immediately cool down, which will put it at about 90 degrees, which is optimal for growing yeast. Now I'm not using all of my water, I'm just pouring a little bit in there. And I will let that set and we'll see if my yeast is still alive. I will have lots and lots of bubbles on the top. While I'm waiting for my yeast to grow or not grow, whichever the case may be, like I said, it has expired. And this camper does not make the greatest place to store things because of the humidity change in it. But I'm going to go ahead and get my garlic ready for my garlic bread. This is elephant garlic, which I absolutely love working with. It doesn't seem to have the really, really strong garlicky flavor as regular garlic does. But it's still good. And smells good. The goal is to chop that up as finely as possible. You just don't want huge chunks of it in your bread. Another thing I like about those elephant garlics is that they are really big. So I'm using 2, what would be a clove, what would be considered a clove, which it took me until I was probably 45, 50 years old to realize what a clove of garlic really meant. This is just a section that comes in the big hand of garlic. So this is what you would consider a clove. And this is an elephant garlic, so it's a huge clove, which technically if you were using regular garlic, you would want to use 2 whole hands for this bread. And the regular garlic, like I said, is a little bit stronger than this, so it's really based on what you would want flavor-wise, how much garlic flavor you want. We like garlic here, and it's good for you. It's probably hard for you to see. The lighting in here is not the greatest, and I probably should have used a glass bowl to show you how the yeast is growing. But you'll notice it's foaming on top, and you can see little bubbles popping here and there. That means that the yeast is active, it is working, and it's going to be good for my bread. Okay, so I have slightly arthritic hands. I don't think that it's exactly arthritis, but it is a condition that I've had since I was at least 28 years old, brought on by pernicious anemia. And so it causes my hands to ache and even locks up little muscles in between my fingers and in the palm of my hand if I overwork them. I have an overreactive nervous system, which is permanent damage from almost dying of lack of B12. I'm going to use my KitchenAid mixer. You guys can just stir this all up and then knead it out like you would regular bread if you want to. this is a way easier way to do it if you have a KitchenAid. I highly suggest that. Or you can use this in a bread machine too. This very same recipe that I'm showing you, I've done in a bread machine before I got my KitchenAid mixer. I like to just mix up a small batter at first so that I'm sure everything's incorporated. So I'm just going to, and you know me with my measurements, the recipe calls for 4.5 cups of flour. I have found that depending on your humidity level, your environment, your overall environment, that is give or take on how many cups of flour you really need for this recipe. And so this is how I tell. I'm going to start with about a cup of flour. And I'm going to put my 2 tablespoons of lard on top of my flour. I'm going to pour in, and you can maybe see better over here how the yeast is grown, but I'm going to pour my yeast and sugar and milk mixture in on top of that. If you don't have a rubber spatula, go to Dollar Tree and get one. If you're going to cook, you got to have it. And especially for things where ingredients are so specific. Sounds like the train is coming through. Now I'm just going to mix that up, incorporate it. And you can see how it's starting to form up into a ball already. I'm going to add the rest of my water now. This was a total of 1.5 cups of water. And mix that in until it becomes like a soup. You're going to need to scrape the sides and the bottom. Remember, in these KitchenAid mixers, the attachments don't reach the bottom of the pan, and you have to scrape it. I'm making a bread soup, guys. Okay. And now I just start adding flour about a cup at a time. And you notice I have my dough hook on here. You want to be sure and use the dough hook. You're making dough. And I like to just at first just slowly incorporate it in. For one, I don't want dust face. Don't need my nose powdered. But for two, I think the slower pace just is not as hard on the yeast. I try to think of it as if I were actually kneading the dough. Okay, now it's getting sticky. Gotta scrape the sides again and the bottom. I don't know if you see, it's starting to come together now. Hopefully I've got my camera at the right angle. Rosie, stop it. Leave the cat alone. Quit barking at the cat. We have a stray cat out here. And it drives Rosie crazy. Now, this time, instead of adding a cup, and you can see it's about, I'm going to add a half a cup because my dough is starting to come together. I don't want it to be a real stiff dough. I want it to be stiff to hold together, but I don't want it to be real stiff. And that, y'all, is the best way I can describe it for you. Turn this down, it's a little too high. Now that half a cup is really coming together. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to need much more, if any at all. Let me grab the camera here. Okay, as you've seen there, it's starting to get stretchy. We're going to scrape the sides again. I like to let it rest for just a few minutes during these last stages before I put in more flour. It seems like the flour soaks up the moisture and you have a lighter bread if you just let it rest a little while before you add your next probably half cup of flour is what I'll be adding next. And then go ahead and add another, I'm thinking I can use a half cup. So what was that, guys? Did you keep count? I think about 3 cups I've put in there now. The dough is starting to really cling to the hook, and it's swirling around, picking up a little bit more flour every time on the edge of the pan. And it's actually starting to form a ball. It's still sticking pretty good to the side of the pan. So I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny bit of flour around the edges of my mixer bowl so that it'll go ahead and continue to form a ball. I love my KitchenAid mixer for reasons like this. I would not be able to make bread as easily and pain-free like I can with this mixer. Now, you can see it's rolling all up into a ball now. I'm going to turn it off, lift it up, and maybe you can tell by the way it's falling off of there the consistency that I like. Scrape that. So it's pretty sticky right now. I'm going to add my jalapenos and my garlic. This is also giving my dough a little bit of time to rest in between kneading. Okay, now for my jalapenos. I have the pre-diced jalapenos. It really doesn't matter whether you use fresh or the jarred, so I just use the jarred ones. I try to let it drain off as much juice as possible. And this is another thing that's all about what your taste preference is. I'm putting 2 good-sized tablespoons. Now you want to know that the juice from the jalapenos and the garlic is going to change the consistency of my dough. Alright, put that down. Slowly mix it in. It's making the dough a little bit wetter, and I'm going to have to add more flour to get it to roll up into that ball that I had a minute ago. Go ahead and turn that off. And that was not quite a half a cup. So we probably are going to make it to our 4.5 cups of flour for this batch. And you just let that mix until it goes back to, you don't see any flour on the sides of your pan anymore. If the dough is sticking to the side of your pan, just add little smidgets of flour where it's sticking. Not much at all. You're just trying to get it to form into a ball around your dough hook. I like that consistency right there. We're going to shut it off and scrape it down again. I'm going to get me a bowl, and I'm just going to put some of my lard in this bowl. You don't want the dough to stick too bad to it. Scrape that out. And press it together. It's still a pretty wet dough at this stage, but I'm going to cover that with a little bit of plastic wrap and put it in a warm spot and let it rise until it becomes double its size right now. Now you don't want to cover it tightly, you want it loosely covered. You're just trying to hold in the moisture so it don't dry out on top while it's rising. Okay, now while that's rising, I'm going to go ahead and cut up my cheese that's going to go on the inside of these little loaves. And when it comes out of the oven, it'll be so soft and ooey gooey. Also, I did go ahead and mix up some olive oil and about a tablespoon of garlic salt. That's going to cover the bread when I take it out of the oven. That is another secret This is just Velveeta cheese, or the Great Value kind is what I get, because Velveeta is like twice the cost of this. And it works just fine. It works the same for this recipe. When I make my jalapeno cheesy garlic bread, I use this loaf pan so that I can individually wrap these and put them in the freezer, and then my husband can take them out and put them in the microwave anytime he's ready for a snack. So you don't have to do it in these small ones. If you don't have these small ones, you can do it in a regular bread loaf pan. But your key is to get your cheese inside your loaf. You don't want it to be a huge chunk of cheese, because it will leave a hole inside your bread and the cheese will melt and sometimes escape out the side of your bread and burn in the bottom of your pan. So you want to keep it in a sliver about that size. Depending on and the length is just going to depend on what kind of bread pan you're using. Also, you'll want to spray your loaf pan really good with some no-stick spray. Now it's getting messy, guys. As you can see, it's rose up perfectly. My yeast was good. We're going to pull that off. And if you're more patient than I am, you can probably not have any of that left on. You just got to go slow. All right, and here, let's think of something that makes me mad this week. See, and it is sticky at this point. Remember, it's going to be sticky when you first start working with it. But you really want it that way because it makes for a lighter bread. At this point, I'm only going to put as much flour in this dough as it takes to hold it together and keep it from sticking to my hands as I work with it. We're going to let that rest a few minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, now that we've rested for a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and turn this out onto a floured board. That elasticity is what you're looking for at this point. Sprinkle some flour on just so we can work with it. And then I'm just going to knead it. Just for a little bit. I can smell that garlic. I cannot wait to get a bite of this. Okay, you can see that I've just kneaded enough flour in there so that, and it's still a soft dough, it's still soft, but I've just kneaded enough flour that I can handle it and work with it to get it into the pan. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to give it a few minutes to rest because it's always easier to work with dough if you let it rest in between your kneading. Okay guys, we let it rest for a little while and you can see it's wanting to work with me a lot better now. When I squish it, it actually stays where instead of snapping back. And that's what you're looking for. And I'm just making a log here. And I'm trying to keep it the same thickness all throughout the whole log. And now I'm going to take my pastry cutter. You can use a knife if you haven't got one of these. I love this thing. My mama got it for me. And you just cut straight down. And since I have 8 different bread pans, I've got to try to divide this up into 8 individual pieces that are all about the same. So now I have this sticky inside, and you can see it's really sticky in there. And I'm just going to press this down, some flour, and press it down on the other side so that I can work with it. And I'm just going to flatten that to about, I would say that's about a 1/2 inch thick. And then you lay your piece of cheese in there and fold it over. And be sure to seal it up as best you absolutely can. Seal that up. because anywhere that you don't have it sealed up, that cheese will melt and it'll ooze out into the bottom of your pan. Because you're going to want to turn these smooth side up to place in your pan. I don't know. Hopefully you guys are seeing that. And I don't mess too much with it because it's going to rise again and it's going to fill up in that pan. Take my next one. Smash it down. Piece of cheese. Fold it over. Seal it up. Turn it to the smooth side up and just lightly press it into your pan. Cover it back up, put it back in my warm spot, and wait for it to rise double. And then go preheat my oven to 400 degrees and have it ready for when these get risen. I brought the squash in. You can see how the golden brown is. I'll be doing that video tomorrow on how I prepared this for our supper tonight. Guys, my bread has risen and it's ready to go get popped into a 400 degree oven. And we'll just keep an eye on it. And as soon as these tops start browning and I can push the top and it doesn't dent in, I know it's going to be done. Okay guys, they blew up on me and that happens sometimes, but it's still going to be delicious. Now I'm just going to take my garlic butter or my garlic salt and olive oil and brush the tops. That way when they bite into it, they'll get a real salty taste there at the beginning of it. And that really does make the bread. Makes a big difference on the bread. Alright, I'm going to let that set and cool off to where I can work with it. And then we'll get it out of there and take a taste. Okay, so there you have it. A hearty, delicious fall meal. I'll be posting how to make the sage butternut squash soup and a recipe for it in a video tomorrow. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Watch for tomorrow when I'll be doing the video on how you can make your own sage butternut squash soup. And thanks guys for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel. Until tomorrow, love and peace to everyone.